All right, if you are just joining us here at the top of the hour at 10:01 on the East Coast, we are continuing to monitor a developing story over in Israel and the Gaza Strip as Hamas launched an attack overnight and in the early morning hours, infiltrating parts of Israel and sending thousands and hundreds and thousands of rockets over into Israel, killing now at least 100 people there. We're also learning some 200 Palestinians have also been killed in a dramatic escalation between tensions between these two groups, both Hamas and the nation of Israel. I want to turn right now to Jonathan Panikoff over at the Atlantic Council to break down really the very latest on what's happening here. Thanks so much for joining us, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me.
Well, first off, can you just kind of give us a breakdown of what's happening here? And while clashes between Hamas and Israel aren't new, this escalation appears to be.
I think that's absolutely right. We've never seen the type of infiltration from Hamas into Israel like we're seeing today. You've seen Hamas quite literally go by land and go through what was thought to be a fairly secure border fence. You've seen them go by sea, quite literally using small boats, and you've seen them use paragliders to go into Israel by air. This was a coordinated, very well planned, very well executed thus far attack by Hamas terrorists. My sense is we're at the beginning of this episode now. This is something new. I think Israelis believe this is something new, and we're probably just starting in terms of what is going to be, you would imagine, an extended conflict.
Absolutely, and we are taking a live look over in the Gaza Strip right now. These are some of the new images that are coming in as Israel launched that essentially a counterattack on Hamas militants there. Obviously, the death toll in Palestine much higher than what we're seeing right now in Israel. Israel has a bit more fortifications to my understanding. I'm hoping you can kind of explain that for our audience, especially those who aren't as well versed in the happenings of the Middle East.
Of course. So look, Israel is more fortified, most prominently through the Iron Dome system, which is an air defense system. Basically, Hamas fires rockets, Israel fires interceptors. They collide in midair, and so the rockets don't hit Israel, don't hit the ground. Now, we've seen unusually some of them actually get through. We don't know the numbers yet. It's still too early. I think the number is probably low. But because Hamas is sending barrages and so many rockets, it's overwhelming the system at times. But that system has provided a level of defense that obviously those living in Gaza don't have. And so it's not unusual to see the number of deaths in Gaza be quite a bit higher than those in Israel. The other thing worth noting, though, however, is that there is a history, and I have nothing to confirm that it's happening this moment, but there is a history of Hamas using public facilities, schools, and other public venues to hide rockets, to hide missiles. And if the Israelis are going to be targeting them, then, of course, at the same time, you'd also see an increase in the number of deaths from such facilities.
Now, Jonathan, we did hear from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just moments ago. I know we did play that out just a little bit ago. I just want to play that out again for any of our audience just joining us. So let's listen into that, and then we can react to that on the back end.
The enemy will pay an unprecedented price. In the meantime, I call on the citizens of Israel to strictly adhere to the directives of the IDF and Home Front Command. We are at war, and we will win it.
Now, Jonathan, Israel's prime minister there, Benjamin Netanyahu, saying, quote, "We are at war." Is that statement more escalated than any other statements that he's made before when discussing this relationship between both Hamas and Israel? What's happening on the ground, and what do you make of those comments?
Yeah, there is a history and a period. There was obviously a long campaign in 2014 where you saw an extended conflict with Hamas as well. But I think over the last few years, you have seen Netanyahu, during the time he's been prime minister, usually try to take a slightly more moderate approach. I think what it is a reflection that he and the security establishment in Israel recognize this is something new. This is not just rockets being fired in a tit for tat from Hamas to Israel and Israel responding in kind. The type of broad, layered, multi-front attack that you're seeing, an infiltration that you're seeing, puts it in a new category. And so Israel is going to respond as it's a new and dynamic situation that it hasn't seen before. And so that's one of the reasons I really do expect there to be a fairly intense and broad conflict that we haven't really seen, let's say, for the last few years.
We continue to take a look at live images there on the ground. I can't tell I'm not sure if this is the Gaza Strip or in parts of Israel. I'm assuming, based on that Palestinian flag there, that is the Gaza Strip. You can see the burning of tires. Also in this same shot, let's go ahead and pop up the audio. We'll listen into this for a second here, Jonathan. We could hear earlier explosions. You can hear bottles being thrown around and gunshots off in the distance as ambulances really scour that scene. We'll just kind of simmer this for 1 second here as we continue this conversation in just a little bit. All right, pretty dramatic scenes there as we take another live look over at the Gaza Strip. You can see the smoke in the distance, rockets continuing to go seemingly from the Israel side over to Palestine. Again, most of these attacks often tend to be kind of heavy-handed from the Israelis, we should say. Is that something that we're going to expect in the long term? And I'm talking about not just today, but do you think that Israel is going to continue a kind of an onslaught of an attack of rockets onto the Palestinians, or what is the expectation of what is to happen next?
So I think you'll certainly see a fairly robust Israeli response. I think the question of intensity actually has less to do with Hamas than it does another militant actor and terrorist actor, which is Hezbollah. Right now, Hezbollah has stayed out of this conflict. It's obviously only about 12 hours old, but there's been warnings in Israel for a while now and from Israeli allies about the potential for a multi-front war. If Hezbollah decides to join the fight, for instance, then I think this will escalate from what is already going to be a fairly major counter-Hamas effort to what could really be a multi-front war that Israel has to face. And in that situation, I think all bets are off. I think the Israelis will be incredibly aggressive and try to be quite forward-leaning to ensure that such a conflict and such an attack from either Hamas or Hezbollah, if they join, doesn't happen again in the coming years.
As we continue to take a look at some of these live images coming in from Israel and Hamas, we're learning some new numbers on the toll of the wounded and the killed. Some 561 wounded people being treated in Israeli hospitals. The numbers for Palestinians much higher. I'm pulling that up right now for everybody. 1,610 wounded in the territory of Palestine following Israel's attack. 198 Palestinians killed, and the numbers that I have right now, at least 77, but I saw reported on Fox News just moments ago about 100 people in the Israel side and Israeli hospitals have been killed. When we talk about those types of numbers compared to these previous attacks, and these are dramatic, we're talking about nearly 2,000 lives being impacted in a single course of a few hours. Is this much larger, much bigger, much different than what we've seen before?
It 100% is, and that's owing to the fact that this wasn't just rocket attacks, but actual infiltration, individuals from Hamas, terrorists on the ground in Israel. Look, I think it's also worth noting it's highly unusual to hear sirens that are the warning sirens in Israel about incoming rocket attacks going off in Jerusalem. Less so in Tel Aviv, but it's still unusual. And you heard them happen both this morning. Not a lot of them. It hasn't happened now in a few hours. The frequency's gone down. But I think that as well is another, factor to highlight, to show as an example of that this is something different about the intensity of the war and frankly how broad Hamas is trying to make it as well.
All right, Jonathan, we are getting a new statement in from the White House. National security advisors from our White House press pool saying Officials briefed the president this morning on the appalling Hamas terrorist attacks in Israel. The president will continue to receive updates, and the White House officials remain in close contact with Israeli partners. As we continue to monitor this, we may be expecting some sort of either a response or some sort of show of solidarity from the American officials in Washington. What traditionally, as these types of things play out, what is usually the Western response?
So from the U.S., I think you'd expect a couple of things. I think you'd expect the U.S. to give quite a lot of leeway for Israel to respond however it decides to respond. You will not see a lot of condemnations, even as the death tolls and the destruction increases in the Gaza Strip. Eventually, you may see back channel messages asking Israel to calm it a little bit, but we're not there right now. On the other hand, I would expect the international community to allow a number of I would expect the international community of apologies to allow Israel to have a few days, but you will see from Europe especially a call for calm sooner than you will for Israel, call for de-escalation. We'll probably see that from the Arab states as well. I think the question is going to be how intense it is, and some of that's just unknown yet. It's going to really be a question as well about whether or not Hezbollah gets involved in the war, because if they do, it really changes the nature of it. You'll almost certainly see, by the way, a request from Israel for more interceptors for the Iron Dome, the defensive system we talked about earlier. That's a request that's usually rushed and filled. But again, it's going to depend on just how things go over the next few days. There's going to be a lot more angles to this to come than we have right now.
All right, very serious situation there happening between Israel and there on the Gaza Strip. What got us to this situation? What are the stems of the current conflict, which I understand goes back decades between these two groups?
It does. That's right. Look, I think that the reality is Israel for years has tried a strategy of what is called to mow the grass, to knock Hamas, knock Hezbollah, knock the Palestinian Islamic Jihad back on its heels a little bit, undercut them, and recognize that they're still going to grow, that Israel doesn't have any presence in Gaza, doesn't have any presence, obviously, in Lebanon, and so it's going to have limited ability to control things on the ground. At the root of this is really Iran. It's the Iranians who provide a lot of the funding, or the Iranians who provide a lot of the weapons, Iranians who have for years viewed Hamas and certainly viewed Hezbollah as a proxy that can be used against Israel when Iran views it as necessary. Now, that doesn't mean Hamas and Hezbollah don't have independent decision-making. They do, but it's nuanced. And it's hard to imagine that they would have launched such an operation without at least giving a heads up to their Iranian supporters.
All right, Jonathan, certainly a very serious situation there as we continue to report on the latest out of Israel as well as there along the Gaza Strip. Very serious there indeed. Jonathan, we appreciate you joining us. Anything that we haven't talked about, anything you'd like to go over before we let you go?
No, I think there's going to be a lot more to come in the coming days. I think whether this escalates and how it's certainly going to escalate, but I think how it escalates is really the big unknown factor. The other question is where the Arab states will be. You've already seen a call, frankly, for a couple of months now about Israel and Saudi with U.S. support trying to talk about normalization. Obviously, the Abraham Accords are out there. I think there's going to be a real question about what happens on the ground and how does that translate into Israel's relations with their Arab neighbors and with the broader Arab region, which they've been trying so hard to create more peaceful agreements with, to normalize relations with. All of those issues could get tied up in this as well, but that's going to be for another day.
All right, Jonathan Panikoff there from the Atlantic Council, breaking down really this very developing, very breaking situation here on Live Now from Fox. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'm sure we'll be talking again very soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks, let's go ahead and get out to a quick commercial break. here on Live Now from Fox. Once we get back, diving back into this conversation and this topic as we continue to follow this breaking news.